I knew something was off the moment I heard the furious pounding on my garage door at 6:12 a.m., the kind of pounding that tells you the person outside believes the world owes them everything and they're here to collect it by force if necessary, and as soon as I cracked it open and saw Karen, the HOA president with a hair-sprayed helmet hair, neon pink jogging suit, clipboard clutched like a sword, and that familiar, entitled smirk, I should have closed it again, but I didn't, and that one split. Second decision became the reason I ended up with police sirens screaming down my street, neighbors recording me from behind blinds, and my entire community acting like I was running an underground fuel cartel instead of just trying to get to work, because before I could even say, "Good morning," she shoved her foot in the doorway and barked, "I need gas now," as if I was the neighborhood petrol station instead of her neighbor, and I blinked at her, confused, until she jabbed her finger toward the HOA clubhouse lot where her oversized SUV sat angled across 2 parking spaces with the hood open and a plastic grocery bag hanging from the mirror, fluttering in the breeze like a white flag of stupidity. Apparently she'd tried to siphon gas from the landscaper's truck yesterday, because she pays HOA dues and deserves perks, and had gotten caught. So today she expected me to fix the problem by giving her 5 gallons of fuel from the red container I kept in my garage for emergencies. When I told her no, she launched into a shrieking rant about community responsibility, neighborly duty, and how the HOA owns this block, which was hilarious because she'd been fined last week for installing a garden gnome without permission, and then she tried to guilt-trip me, saying her dog had school pickup and she had an urgent spa appointment, but I stood my ground and said, "Karen, your emergencies are not emergencies." And that's when her face twisted into something between a toddler tantrum and a horror movie demon, and she stomped into my garage without permission, grabbed the gas can, and tried to drag it out like she was repossessing property she owned. I snatched it back, she stumbled, tripped over the broom, and let out a scream so dramatic it echoed across the driveway like an ambulance siren. Seriously, Broadway would have cast her on the spot, then shouted at the top of her lungs, "Assault! He attacked me!" Even though she was the one who barged in, and that was the precise moment 3 of my neighbors stepped outside to see what the commotion was, phones already recording, hoping to catch yet another HOA meltdown worthy of a viral TikTok, which only fueled Karen's performance even more as she dropped to the ground, clutching her ankle, wailing like she'd been run over, screaming, "He's holding gas hostage. Call the police right now." And before I could even react, she grabbed her walkie-talkie. The HOA board actually issued them to themselves because they think they're some sort of elite tactical unit, and yelled, "Code red. Homeowner refusing compliance," while rolling around on my driveway like a beached whale. Then she stood up, brushed off the dramatic dirt she'd rolled into, pointed in my face and hissed, "If you don't give me that gas can in the next 10 seconds, I will have you arrested for theft of community resources." And I couldn't help it, I laughed, which was apparently the worst thing I could have done because she immediately whipped out her phone, dialed 911, and in the most hysterical, breathless voice imaginable, told the operator that I was hoarding fuel, threatening neighborhood safety, and holding her property hostage, while emphasizing that she was the HOA president, as if that automatically upgraded her emergency to federal status, and then she ended with, "Send units now, he is dangerous," and hung up with a triumphant smirk like she'd just checkmated a chess grandmaster. 10 minutes later, the entire neighborhood turned into a crime scene, with squad cars screeching onto my street, lights flashing, officers stepping out with hands near their holsters, shouting, "Sir, step away from the gas can," as though I was about to blow up the zip code, and I stood there dumbfounded as Karen dramatically limped over to them, fake injury mysteriously switching from her left ankle to her right while she wailed about my emotional trauma, and pointed at me like I was some villain threatening national security. The officers approached me cautiously, clearly unsure whether to expect a criminal mastermind or a confused homeowner, and one of them quietly asked, "Sir, did you refuse to give this woman free gasoline?" And I swear I almost burst out laughing, but before I could explain, Karen shoved herself between us like a linebacker, shouting, "He is lying! Arrest him! He stole from HOA property!" And then one officer raised an eyebrow and said, "Ma'am, gas cans inside his garage are not HOA property," which made her sputter like a malfunctioning kettle, and that's when she snapped, turning red, screaming incoherently, and grabbing the gas can again, except this time, she yanked it so aggressively that the cap popped off and splashed fuel across the driveway, making everyone jump back. Then she pointed at the spilled gas and screamed even louder, "See? He's trying to create a fire hazard to attack me. That is a crime." And the cops looked at me like I was babysitting a feral raccoon, and one officer muttered, "Sir, I'm going to need you to calm down," even though I wasn't doing anything, but before I could even respond, Karen stormed toward the officers, huffing and puffing, shouting, "You're all witnesses! Take him in!" And then, because she can never just stop, She reached behind one officer, grabbed his handcuffs, and tried to slap them onto my wrist herself, and the moment her fingers touched the metal, the officer spun around in shock, the other officers tensed, and Karen froze like a deer caught in headlights, realizing for the first time in her life that she might have gone too far. But it was already too late because the officer barked, "Ma'am, step back now," and she stumbled backward, tripping again, knocking over my trash bin, and landing in a pile of recycling as the entire neighborhood gasped. But the worst part wasn't even that. The worst part was when the officer closest to me let out a slow breath, unclipped his radio, and said the words that made my stomach drop. "Dispatch, we have a situation. We're going to need the fire department and HOA compliance officer on site. Possible hazardous materials violation." And just as I turned toward him to say, "What violation?" the officer looked me dead in the eyes, expression cold, and said, "Sir, until we determine whether you illegally stored fuel beyond residential limits, we may have to place you in temporary custody." And the moment he reached for the handcuffs on his belt, Karen let out a victorious shriek that echoed across the entire block, right before something even worse happened, something none of us expected, something that made every cop whirl around with their hands going straight to their weapons as the air around us went dead silent, and I realized, with a pulse of dread, that Section 1 of this nightmare was only the warm-up, because someone else had just arrived at the scene, and the look on the lead officer's face told me this was about to get 100 times worse. The second I saw the matte black SUV crawl around the corner, no headlights, no front plate, windows tinted darker than Karen's overdrawn eyeliner, my stomach twisted because this wasn't just another curious neighbor or some HOA board member arriving to validate Karen's delusions. This vehicle moved with the slow, deliberate confidence of someone who believed the entire street belonged to them. And the way the officer's posture changed, hands hovering over their holsters, feet shifting, radios buzzing with tension, told me they recognized it too, and as it rolled to a stop directly in front of my driveway, blocking the road like we were being sealed into a crime scene, the rear door swung open and out stepped the last person I expected, Mr. Grayson, the HOA's so-called compliance director, a man who treated the HOA bylaws like holy scripture and enforced them with the zeal of a tax auditor on a sugar rush. Tall, angular, always wearing those ridiculous gold-framed glasses that made him look like an angry accountant, holding his leather folder like it contained the nuclear codes. He surveyed the scene with the smug caution of a man who never once in his life admitted he could be wrong, and the moment Karen saw him, she practically levitated off the ground, sprinting toward him in her lopsided limp, screaming, "Grayson, arrest him immediately! He's endangering the community!" While flailing her arms so wildly she almost smacked a police officer in the face. But Grayson didn't even acknowledge her, didn't even turn his head. He simply raised one hand to silence her like she was an annoying toddler tugging at his sleeve, then stepped past her, adjusting his glasses as he inspected the spilled gasoline like he was Sherlock Holmes analyzing a corpse, before finally turning to me with an expression that made my blood pressure spike as he said, "Mr. Carter, you are in violation of Section 14, subsection D of the Wellington Oaks Hazard Prevention Code," and I opened my mouth to argue, but he kept talking. Unauthorized storage of flammable liquids exceeding the HOA's approved maximum, which was so laughably wrong I almost choked because it was literally one gas can, the kind sold at every hardware store in America. I tried to explain. "Grayson, it's just emergency fuel," but he cut me off, snapping, "I'll speak when spoken to," and then scribbled something aggressively into his folder, turning to the lead officer with the confidence of a man convinced the entire legal system revolved around HOA rules. "Officer," he said, "I formally request that you detain this homeowner until we complete a full hazard investigation." The cop blinked at him like he just demanded diplomatic immunity, and Karen gasped dramatically, clutching her chest like she was witnessing a life-changing miracle. Meanwhile, neighbors were gathering in clusters, whispering, filming, and exchanging bets on whether I'd end up in handcuffs or the HO would implode from stupidity first, and I swear someone even started live streaming with the caption, "HOA Gone Wild. Gas Edition." But before the officers could respond, Grayson's attention snapped toward the SUV, and from the other side of. I knew the situation had gone from insane to catastrophic the moment Karen's SUV jumped the curb like a battering ram, her tires screaming as she aimed the vehicle not at the street to escape, not at an officer in panic, but directly at the shed behind my house. The same shed where the mysterious second gas can and blinking device waited like a detonator in a nightmare, and for a split second everyone froze, paralyzed by the impossibility of the moment, watching the pink-jacketed president of our HOA transform into a full-blown demolition driver, but instinct kicked in for the fire investigator, who shouted, "Move!" as he dove at one officer and shoved him to the ground, while two others sprinted sideways, barely avoiding being crushed as the SUV barreled forward, the force so violent it ripped through the side fencing and sent splinters flying through the air like shrapnel. I stumbled back, heart slamming in my chest. My brain still trying to understand why Karen, who once issued a violation because someone's mailbox was slightly tilted, was now driving like a fugitive on a mission to blow up my property. The SUV smashed into the shed with a deafening explosion of wood and metal, the impact sending the structure collapsing inward, dust clouds bursting up like a bomb blast, windows in nearby houses rattling, neighbors screaming as they ducked behind their porches, and officers rushing in with weapons drawn. The investigator grabbed my arm and yanked me behind his truck to shield me from debris as he shouted into his radio for the bomb squad to accelerate arrival and for backup units to lock down the street. But the nightmare wasn't over, because as the dust settled, the SUV's engine was still running, wheels spinning, the front end buried in the remains of my shed, and through the cracked windshield we saw her, Karen, gripping the steering wheel with white-knuckled terror, her eyes wild. Her face flushed with adrenaline, not the triumphant smirk she always wore, but genuine, raw fear, the look of somebody who realizes too late they've crossed a line they can't walk back from. But then something shifted. Her gaze snapped away from the officers approaching and instead locked onto something behind the shed wreckage, something we couldn't see yet, and she shouted something that sounded like, "Don't let them get it!" before she tried to slam the accelerator again as if she believed she could break through solid earth, but the engine sputtered and stalled, finally choking into silence. Officers swarmed the vehicle, ordering her to unlock the doors, to put her hands up, but she wildly shook her head, refusing, screaming, "You don't understand. I wasn't supposed to get caught. They're watching." And that one sentence sent a jolt of dread through every officer present. The fire investigator narrowed his eyes and leaned toward me, voice low but sharp. "Who is they?" And I could only shake my head. I had no idea. Then with a sudden violent crack, an officer smashed the driver's window, reached in, and unlatched the door while two others pulled Karen out kicking and screaming, her legs flailing, shoes flying off, hair smoking with dust, and as they pinned her to the ground, finally handcuffing the woman who had been terrorizing this neighborhood for years. She twisted her neck to look at me, her voice dropping to a chilling whisper. "You should have given me the gas. I was trying to save you." The world fell silent in my head. Save me from what? But before I could ask, officers dragged her to her feet and hauled her toward a squad car, but she kept screaming, "Check the floor! Check the floor! It's under the floor!" And even though the officers dismissed it as more of her hysteria, the fire investigator did not. He walked back toward the destroyed shed cautiously, scanning the debris, and after a moment, he shouted for two officers to join him as he knelt beside the wreckage. Curiosity and dread pulled me closer, and when the investigator lifted a broken floorboard with his gloved hand, my entire body went cold, because beneath the shed, buried in the soil, wrapped in heavy-duty plastic, were three more containers, identical to the planted one, each with blinking indicators, wires, timers, and a thick layer of dust that suggested they'd been there for far longer than yesterday. The investigator's jaw tightened as he whispered, "This wasn't planted recently. Someone hid these here months ago." Months. But the shed was on my property. Who could have accessed it? Who would have planted multiple devices under it without me noticing? The investigator waved me back again as officers formed a wider perimeter, radios crackling like mad, neighbors gasping and recording, Karen still shrieking from the back of the squad car, kicking the window until an officer threatened to restrain her ankles, but she didn't stop. She kept screaming, "He knows! He knows! They're coming back for it!" The investigator turned to me, face grave. "Mr. Carter, is there anyone besides you who had regular access to this shed?" And I shook my head, saying, "No, just me," but then my voice caught because that wasn't entirely true. The landscapers occasionally used my shed when they were working, storing equipment temporarily, and I remembered something. 3 months ago, the HOA switched landscaping companies after Karen claimed the previous team didn't respect HOA hierarchy. The new team came with glowing reviews but also odd behavior. They worked late, stayed unusually quiet, didn't talk to neighbors, and once, I caught them near the shed even though their tools were already stored in their truck. At the time I thought nothing of it, but now, with the blinking devices staring at me, I felt a cold dread spreading through my veins. Before I could speak, a loud horn blared from the street. Another SUV had pulled up. This one all white with tinted windows, no logos, no plates, and the moment officers turned toward it, it reversed and sped off as if the driver realized they'd arrived too soon. The investigator snapped, "Units, follow that vehicle!" But it vanished down the street before the patrol cars could catch up, leaving behind only the faint smell of burnt rubber. Neighbors murmured nervously, and even the officers looked shaken. The investigator stepped beside me, voice low, "Mr. Carter, these devices weren't meant to explode. They were meant to be found." I stared at him, confused. Found by who? He took a slow breath. By authorities. To frame you. Or someone else. Or to trigger an investigation. Then his eyes narrowed. Or they were meant to stay hidden until someone came back for them. And Karen panicked because we found one too early. It felt like gravity shifted beneath me. Why would she try to destroy them? I asked. The investigator answered with a question. Do you know what's inside these containers? I shook my head. It's not explosive, he said quietly. It's fuel mixed with stabilizer. Perfect for long-term storage. Perfect for smuggling. My mind spun. Smuggling? Fuel? Through my shed? In the middle of a suburban neighborhood? It made no sense, until it did. Wellington Oaks HOA bordered the back of the highway industrial exit where commercial trucks passed daily. The landscape crews often came through that route. The shed was shielded from street view. The HOA board had access to gate keys. Karen had demanded fuel like it was owed to her. The pieces started connecting, forming a horrifying picture. The HOA wasn't just enforcing rules, they were running something. Something illegal. Something big. And when Karen saw officers discovering the first container, she realized the entire operation, whatever it was about to collapse. That's why she tried to destroy the shed. Not to kill anyone. Not even to cover her tracks. But to keep us from seeing what was underneath. But as officers uncovered the third and fourth container, the investigator straightened suddenly, his face going white, and I followed his gaze, because buried beneath the dirt, half exposed now, was something smaller. Metallic. Cylindrical. About the size of a soda can. But with a symbol carved into it. A symbol I recognized from the HOA's annual maintenance fund documents. A mark Karen claimed was for internal use only. The investigator picked it up, studying it, and whispered, "This isn't fuel." I swallowed hard. "Then what is it?" He looked at me, fear flickering in his eyes for the first time since he arrived. "This," he said, "is a tracking beacon." My breath caught. Tracking what? He held the beacon up to the light, and the tiny LED on its surface blinked twice. Then twice again. A pattern. A signal. And before he could answer, several radios crackled at once, every officer's at the same time, flooding the air with static followed by a sharp, robotic voice. "Unit signal interference detected. Unknown device active in your location." The investigator's eyes widened, and he shouted for everyone to back away from the shed. Right as the beacon's blinking accelerated, the sound in every radio growing louder, sharper, more urgent. Officers scrambled. Neighbors screamed. Karen began thrashing even harder against the squad car window. And as the ground beneath the shed vibrated with a low mechanical hum rising from below, something buried deeper than the containers, I realized with horrifying clarity that the devices under my shed weren't the end of the story. They were the beginning. Because something else, something bigger, was waking up beneath my property. And Section 3 ends with the moment I understood that whatever was buried under my shed wasn't put there by Karen alone. It was part of something she was terrified of. Something she accidentally exposed. Something she never meant for us to uncover. And it was something that, according to the blinking beacon in the investigator's hand, was now coming online. I should have known something unimaginable was about to unfold the moment the ground beneath my shed vibrated so hard my teeth rattled, because when soil trembles like a heartbeat under your feet, when the radios of 12 officers crackle with interference strong enough to drown human voices, when a beacon in the fire investigator's hand begins blinking like a countdown, you don't think, HOA dispute, you think, we were never supposed to find this, and as the rumbling intensified, climbing from a low hum to a grinding mechanical churn that felt ancient and industrial at the same time, the officers pulled back in a panic, shouting for everyone to clear the yard. But before any of us could react fully, the soil beneath the crushed shed split open like jaws, board snapping apart as metal scraped against earth, rising slowly, too slowly for anything natural, and when the dirt fell away, revealing the gleam of a steel hatch the size of a car door, my breath seized because this wasn't some amateur smuggler hiding supplies. This was infrastructure, engineered and welded, buried deep beneath my lawn like it belonged to another world. The fire investigator swore under his breath as he radioed for federal backup, the officers widened their perimeter, neighbors fled indoors, and all the while Karen watched from the back of the police car, her face pressed to the glass, eyes wild, screaming, "Don't open it! You're all going to make it worse!" But the hatch kept rising on its own, gears grinding, dirt cascading off its edges, and when it finally stopped, when the metal door clanked into place revealing a recessed keypad, wires, and a glowing panel with the same HOA symbol engraved into its steel, the investigator turned to me with an expression I'd never seen before, fear mixed with understanding. "This isn't a smuggling cell," he murmured. "This is a maintenance vault." A maintenance vault for what? My yard wasn't connected to anything. I didn't live near a facility. No pipelines, no water treatment, nothing that needed a vault. But then the investigator tapped the symbol etched into the hatch, the same one I'd seen on HOA infrastructure reports Karen never allowed homeowners to read fully, and the meaning hit him first. "Oh my God," he whispered. "Your HOA isn't just a neighborhood organization. It's sitting on top of county emergency fuel lines." Fuel lines? Through my backyard? I stepped forward, shock turning into anger. Why would fuel lines be under a house? The investigator inhaled sharply. Because before this neighborhood was built, this land was a designated industrial reserve. There were underground fuel conduits installed for emergency routing. And then his voice dropped. They weren't supposed to be reactivated. The realization slammed into me like a truck, the blinking containers, the stabilizer, the landscapers, the new HOA rules requiring ground inspections, the keypad with the HOA symbol. "Are you saying the HOA was tapping into government fuel lines?" I asked, my voice cracking. He didn't answer directly, but his silence said everything. Before we could process the implications, the keypad on the hatch beeped, not from us touching it, but from receiving a remote signal, and every officer froze as the lights on the panel switched from red to green and a mechanical voice emitted softly from beneath. "Authorization received. Accessing below." Karen erupted in hysterical screaming, "Turn it off! Turn it off! They're coming for the supply!" Officers scrambled backward, hands on weapons, unsure whether they were about to be ambushed by criminals, government agents, or something else entirely. The investigator lunged forward to force the hatch closed, but it was too late. The massive metal door hissed and slid open, releasing a wave of cold air that smelled like diesel mixed with chemical preservative, and when the fog cleared, we saw it, a ladder descending into a long, dimly lit tunnel carved from reinforced steel, stretching farther than the eye could see, cables running along the ceiling, conduits humming with energy. The investigator swallowed hard. "Nobody goes down there," he ordered. "Not without hazmat, backup, and authorization." But someone was already down there, because footsteps echoed up the tunnel. Slow, heavy, deliberate. Every officer drew their weapons simultaneously, shouting warnings, aiming at the hatch as the footsteps grew louder, until a figure appeared at the bottom of the ladder, climbing up, boots thudding against metal rungs with the sound of a person who didn't care how much noise they made. Karen shrieked inside the cruiser, thrashing so violently that 2 officers had to physically restrain her to keep her from breaking the window. "It's him!" she screamed. "He's going to shut it down. He told us to hide everything." But the officers couldn't hear her over the commotion as the figure reached the top of the ladder and emerged. A man in a heavy dark jacket, clean-shaven, with the calm posture of someone used to power. He carried a tablet identical to the fire investigators, except his bore the same HOA symbol etched into the hatch. His expression wasn't surprised, panicked, or angry. No, he looked mildly inconvenienced. "Gentlemen," he said with quiet authority, "I'll need everyone to step away from the vault. HOA emergency inspection in progress." The officers stared at him like he'd lost his mind. One shouted, "SR, put your hands up!" But the man merely sighed, raising his ID slowly, an ID that made the investigator's face drain of color. Because it wasn't from the HOA. It was from County Emergency Infrastructure Oversight. "Sir," the investigator stammered, "why is this vault active?" "It was marked decommissioned." The man gave a humorless chuckle. "It was supposed to be. Until your HOA decided to reactivate the line illegally." My head spun. Illegal reactivation? The HOA? Karen, what did they do? The official continued, "Your HOA president made a deal with a local fuel distributor, one under investigation. They used this tunnel to store and siphon government-reserved fuel reserves, hiding it beneath your shed using landscapers as couriers." The world tilted. Karen had been selling government emergency fuel. The containers weren't bombs, they were siphoning units. "But why bury everything under my shed?" I demanded. The official looked at me, then pointed to a faded marking on the hatch I hadn't noticed. My lot number. "Because your property sits on the central access valve." The central valve. The master tap. They hadn't just used my yard, they depended on it. Karen had tried to get free gas from me because she didn't want to blow her cover by accessing the vault too early. She tried to frame me because she panicked when the investigator found the planted device. And she rammed the SUV because she thought destroying the shed would hide the evidence forever. The official continued climbing out of the hatch, dusting off his gloves. "We've been tracking unauthorized fuel flow for 6 months. This is the last missing node." Officers moved in to arrest him, not understanding the situation, but before they could touch him, every radio erupted at once with a piercing emergency tone followed by a dispatcher screaming, "All units, warning, a pressure surge has been detected in the southern main fuel line, imminent rupture, evacuate the area." The official jerked his head toward the hatch, his calm vanishing instantly. "They tried to shut the system down without authorization," he snapped. "The line is overloaded." The investigator looked at him, horrified. "How bad is it?" The official didn't answer with words. He just grabbed his tablet, sprinted to the hatch, and yelled, "If we don't stabilize it, the entire neighborhood will go up." Officers scrambled, neighbors screamed, and the ground vibrated again, this time harder, deeper, like a giant exhaling heat beneath the earth. "We have to get out," an officer yelled, but the official shouted back, "If you run, it'll detonate underground and take out half the county." The investigator turned to me, grabbing my shoulder. "Carter, we don't have time. That hatch is the only manual override in the entire system. It's on your property. That means one of us has to go down there now." My blood froze. I can't fix fuel lines." "You don't have to," he said breathlessly. "You just have to reach the emergency shutoff and open the bypass so the pressure doesn't blow." "Which is where?" 200 feet down the tunnel. Before I could even process the sentence, the ground convulsed violently, a blast of hot air shooting up from the hatch like a furnace opening. The official shouted for everyone to brace as alarms blared from his tablet. And then, through the chaos, through the dust, through the screaming radios, an officer lost his footing and fell backward, his hand slamming into the hatch console. The keypad beeped. The hatch hissed. And then, IT slammed shut, trapping the official inside, locking the only expert underground with a rising pressure surge about to ignite the entire block. The investigator lunged toward the hatch, pounding the steel. "Open it," he shouted. "The manual override is inside." But the hatch didn't move. The keypad was dead. The beacon blinked faster. Karen, still screaming, pressed her face to the squad car glass and howled, "You shouldn't have touched it. Now they can't stop it." And the final cliffhanger hits as the fire investigator turned to me, face pale, and said, "Carter, the backup key is inside your house." Inside my house. Somewhere I had never seen it. Somewhere the HOA might have hidden it. Somewhere I had to find in seconds while a fuel line beneath my property prepared to erupt and wipe the neighborhood off the map. And that's where Section 4 ends, me sprinting toward my house with officers screaming behind me, the ground trembling, the beacon blinking, Karen still shrieking warnings, and the knowledge that the only thing standing between my neighborhood and an underground explosion was a key someone hid inside my home without me ever knowing.